Once you become aware, do you have to have a plan of where you are going? Or do you leave that up to the universe to bring that to you, for you then to make the choice? Many people have been asking that question. Do you have a plan to where you're going, or does that just happen when you are in touch with the creative power within you? Either way may be the case. For some people, something just spontaneously and organically grows, and before they know it, they are engaged in some inspired and empowered activity. It may start very small, and they may not even know that how it's going to grow and develop. It's just the consciousness takes over, and they didn't plan it. Sometimes, just an example, you could have a musician who just loves playing this instrument, and then he just is at a street corner playing his instrument, and then somebody comes and says, "Oh, this is great, why don't you come to a studio?" And it can develop from there without him having had any plan, just enjoying the doing. For others, something may come to them suddenly, an image of something that wants to be, I put it that way, I say that wants to be created. It's not so much I want to create this. When something comes to you from a deeper level, it feels more like that this wants to be created. So it comes, an image or a thought even comes to you, and then you suddenly know what it is that wants to be created through you. And then one could say that you have a plan. But the plan is very different from the plans that the ego had when you were still trapped in ego structures, because whatever plan the ego has is very limited by its needs. The ego really seeks itself. Through its plans, it seeks an enhancement of itself. So those are the plans that the ego creates, and they are flawed, deeply flawed. And whatever action you take in order to carry out the ego's plans is also going to be deeply flawed, and will bring about a lot of heartache and problems, and creates problems more and more for yourself and others. And it's hard, it's a struggle. That's always a sign that there's the ego somewhere. You're struggling. I'm not talking about intensity. Things that plans. So you have ego plans. They are really. There's always a hidden self-seeking in whatever the plan might be. The ego, when it comes through the ego, it's a hidden form of self-seeking. But the plans that I'm talking about here come from a deeper level within yourself. That's why I usually say not that you want to create this or that, but it wants to be created through you. And so there is the deeper, the unconditioned wants to create form through you, because it loves the creation of form. How do I know that? Well, just look around and you see that the universe loves to create multiplicity, an incredible multiplicity of life forms everywhere throughout the cosmos. Just planet Earth alone, just look at the billions of life forms. So obviously the universe enjoys the creation of form, and it has some purpose that we cannot conceptually, rationally, intellectually fully understand, although we can have an inkling of why. But we cannot fully understand what the ultimate purpose of the creation of forms is. Yes, we have an inkling, I sometimes talk of it. But one thing is certain, the universe enjoys that. Consciousness enjoys the play of form. And it can happen through you. And it's deeply enjoyable. So something may come to you then, and then you can say, oh, I have a plan, and it'll be inspired, and there's no self-seeking in it. In other words, you're not looking to whatever it is that wants to be created through you. You're not looking to it for happiness or self-enhancement or fame or wealth. That those things may come. You may get fame, you may get wealth, you may get those things as byproducts, but that's not the reason why this creation happens through you. There is no self-seeking, and yet whatever the ego would have sought for itself may come to you as the adding on, as Jesus puts it. Things may be added on. If there's an enormous energy output from you into the world, it's not yours, of course, there's no personal energy, it will be a misperception. But if you become a channel for that universal energy, then of course things will come back to you, even usually also in material forms. So there will be, if there's an enormous outflow, an enormous giving, not yours, but as a channel, things will come back to you, because if you give out to the universe gives back. So you may enjoy wealth, but it would be just an adding on to, or you might give part of it away, or all of it, whatever it is that you feel is right for you. Just so you can, to summarize, for some, there's just a spontaneous evolution of the creative impulse into the external, and it happens through them without any prior plan. For others, something arises in their minds and say, yes, this is what I need to do. This is what wants to come into being through me. I feel that very strongly. And then you take action. And important is not be aware of the energy field behind the action that you take, so that you don't lose the presence, because the ego, even there, can still take over. If any action you take in order to achieve something, if stress and negativity come in, when you find obstacles, because there's always some obstacle that you encounter when you begin to create something new, there will be some obstacles. There will also be enormous help coming, not necessarily immediately, perhaps immediately, but at some point you will notice an influx of supportive energy. But you may also encounter obstacles in the form of people who don't want you to create something new. People who are so stuck in their mind patterns, they resist anything new. So that's a very common thing. Or obstacles in some other form. So if you encounter an obstacle and there's negativity or attack, you're attacking, then you're quickly losing power. The ego is attempting to take over. So whenever you are trying hard or struggling or stress arises, stress is another indicator that you are no longer fully aligned with the power within. Then you become stressed. upset, anxious, complaining, attacking somebody, you're losing power quickly. So that's a good indicator whenever you engage in creative action, manifesting this or that. Is stress arising? Now, I'm not saying that there is not going to be an intense energy behind when you're engaged in creative activity. There is intense energy behind it, which from an external viewpoint can sometimes be misinterpreted almost as stress, but it's not stress at all. It's just intensity of energy behind creation. It is, but it's joyful. It's intense but joyful, and you can feel that intensity when you're in the midst of some creation happening through you. Enormous intensity of energy, and that's but very different from stress. Stress is always, it's not flowing, but this intensity is flowing. And it deals with the intensity deals with obstacles in a very different way from the ego. The intensity can sweep away obstacles, or it can transform obstacles into something helpful. Even humans, it doesn't attack. Another thing to be, yes, you find obstacles when you create something, but as I just mentioned, also you encounter the phenomenon of being supported. If your creation is aligned with what the universe wants, then it becomes enormously empowered. It's like riding on a huge wave. Somebody wrote a poem or something about it. Was it Shakespeare? It starts with, "There is a tide in the affairs of men." And I can't remember the rest. But so if you catch that tide, which is the tide of something wanting to be created through you, and that movement, and then you're riding on this enormous wave. And at some point, the creation then happens, and so then that wave comes to an end. And then there may be a time period when there's more of a withdrawal before new creation happens. So that varies from person to person. It's exciting, it's wonderful to be part of that, because it's something, an entirely new way of being coming to this planet.
It's a question about personal and romantic love. If one is in the surrendered state of consciousness, can they? I've heard teachings from my own experience and from just reading. With romantic love, there can be, "I need you," behavioral expectations. And then there's like the selfless kind of love where there are no behavioral expectations and you still love the person. My question is, if you're in the surrendered state of consciousness, if you're completely surrendered to what is, do you still have that kind of selfless love for a specific person romantically? Or does that kind of dissolve? Or is it just only the universal, which is wonderful, the universal love? It's amazing. It's wow, you know? But can you also have that specific kind of love for someone?
Thank you. So the question you're basically asking, would you then love everybody equally, so there would not be one person singled out as special, as the Course in Miracles calls it special relationship, which the Course in Miracles says, of course, it's of the ego, to single one out as special. Now, if you single one out as special and what you see in the other is the form only, and you're attached to the form, which doesn't just mean the physical form. Of course, that's an important part of it, because there is part of the sexuality and all that, which is part of the attraction. But it also includes the psychological form of the other, who you think that person is, their psychological makeup, how they behave and speak and act. That is also form, that's the psychological form. And there can be strong attachment to those aspects. Both the physical come together with the psychological, which includes also emotions. There's an emotional link also there. And those when they all come together, you fall in love. And aptly, it's called fall because it's a fall in consciousness. But that's okay. If that's what you experience, then that life wants you to experience that. It's part of your learning, that fall in consciousness. Now, it's not immediately, of course, experienced as a fall. It's experienced as a high. And only afterwards do you realize, oh, that was a fall. And afterwards can be after a year. It can be after 3 months. It can be after the honeymoon. It can be soon after you move in together. And then the suffering starts. What before was the love now becomes the suffering. And then for a while it can happen that you fluctuate for the next year or 2 or 3 between still feeling the love and the suffering, and then usually it comes to an end after a while, or you compromise and for some other reason stay together. So that's now if you are able to feel in the other, well, first of all in yourself, that which is beyond form, the essence, the stillness, the presence, whatever we want to call it. And by sensing it in yourself and being it, then you recognize it in another. And that recognition, that in the space of stillness is true love, which doesn't need the other, because the other only reflects to you who you are. But even there it can happen that the form of the other, because you are not just the formless, temporarily you are also the form. Temporarily you are either a man or a woman. Temporarily you have this body. And this form, this man or this woman, and this body and the emotional field may find a certain resonance with, on different levels, be it sexual, emotional, psychological levels, a certain resonance with the other form. And that resonance, that is what in the unenlightened romantic love makes up the entire relationship. But now, when you know who you are in your essence, all those factors are still there, but they do not make up the entire relationship. Beyond the resonance between the sexual or emotional or physical resonance, there's a deeper level present. So you can go through the motions of romantic love with the transcendent level also present in yourself and recognizing it in the other. So romantic love may, after a while, of course, for the relationship to be truly deep in any relationship, some transcendent element has to be there, because it's not going to last otherwise. It doesn't mean necessarily that people need to be totally awake already, totally awake, knowing who they are, but some element of the formless must be there eventually in the relationship for the relationship to survive and be a true relationship. Otherwise, all you have left in the relationship is your judgments about the other and physical attraction and just mind, emotional. And that's ultimately is not enough. It's not enough. The added element, the transcendent element, needs to be there. And if the transcendent is there, you can be quite content even without the romantic relationship. You no longer say, I need that. It's when it's there, it's beautiful, but you don't need that. Yeah, pull. So the mind, it is often in relationships, the mind prevents the deeper level, the transcendent level from arising in the relationship. So the mind destroys the relationship. Identification with the story in the mind, which is about yourself, and the other obscures love. It might even say love. Well, there's no such thing as love. I read a lovely in a novel last year by a British writer. It is McEwan. He's a well-known contemporary writer, Ian McEwan, and he wrote this book about. It's called On Chesil Beach. It's about two young people falling in love in England in the 50s. And these two young people, they feel the pull towards each other, and they begin to fall in love. But sexually, they are completely repressed and very fearful about. It's in the 50s, so the sixth revolution hasn't happened yet about sex. So they're both extremely fearful about sex. And then they get married, and their first night they stay in a bed and breakfast on near Chesil Beach in the south of England, and they're trying to have sex for the first time, and it's a disaster. Dreadful disaster. And she is so shocked, she runs out of the room to the beach. Oh, they don't realize it's actually quite funny. I don't explain what disaster, you can probably imagine it. So she runs out, and the next day, so they don't see each other that night. That's their honeymoon, their wedding night. And the next day, he goes to the beach, Chesil Beach, and she sees she's walking on the beach. They start talking to each other, and both feel still, the pull is still there. But both their minds are bringing up stories why it's not possible, it's dreadful. They are projecting things onto the other, and so the pull is there, but they both create stories in their minds that cuts them off from the other. And they separate. And then they spend the rest of their lives doing other things. And the rest of their lives in the novel is compressed to 5 or 6 pages. And that shows how destructive the mind can be of true relationship. How the mind imposes interpretations on the other that are total fictions. But there's so much, as Don Miguel Ruiz would say, there's so much faith in these fictions that it's an impossibility for the human being to see what the mind is creating is a fictitious judgment on that creates a barrier between yourself and the other. This writer is not spiritual at all. He just observed human nature and he presented it, and that is the ultimate lesson is spiritual.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was putting away some clothes this morning, hanging up some clothes and folding something, and we talked yesterday about somebody asking a question about repetitive things. You get up in the morning, you do your repetitive tasks every day, and most of one's life consists of little tasks. There's rarely anything big, and if there is, it doesn't last long. What would be big? A wedding, a funeral, or in North America, Thanksgiving, turkey dinner, Christmas, a promotion, or suddenly they write about you in People magazine. Hopefully something good. Or some big thing, you're going to talk or give a talk to a few hundred people. But even a seemingly big thing consists of just one little thing at a time. Now, if you had the idea, this is just a little example, I'm coming back to the clothes in a little while. One could say that folding up clothes and hanging up shirts is an insignificant thing that one would only do in order to get somewhere else. And in this case, if I thought, okay, I have to get this done because this really big thing is waiting for me, all these people are waiting for me to talk, give a big talk, then in the meantime, all the little things leading up to it would be regarded as something that you have to get out of the way or pay little attention to because I have this big thing coming up. And then this big thing coming up is a mind form, would become a mind form, big thing called people wanting me to say something significant, but who knows if I can say something significant. That would have led to not only not paying much attention to the little things, but also most probably to a sense of anxiety, because the mind has created a big thing. Now, if I had that, then it would not be enjoyable to do what I do, because if every time I got anxious before a talk, that would be dreadful. I'd rather not do it. So why is there no anxiety? Because I realize even a so-called big talk consists of little things. You approach it, they pick me up in a buggy and then drive, and then I step out, and then it's really one step at a time. And then I sit in a little room for a few minutes and look around and breathe, and then I come here. It's still one little step at a time, and then I sit here, and then one word comes out, and then another word comes out. It's just that too is just small. It's only the mind that creates differences and says I'm waiting for the next big thing. And for other people, a big thing could be the next vacation they look forward to. In the meantime, they're just trying to get to that future moment. Or getting married, looking for someone to get married, finding the right relationship. That would be the big thing, wouldn't it, if I could find that, the partner, the ideal partner for me, and then you're looking towards that, and in the meantime, little attention is paid to the intervening periods. But the strange thing is, most of your life is the intervening periods. 95%, no, 99% is something that happens while you wait for something else to happen. And it's an unconscious way to live. So, as I was folding up my clothes, and I realized how extremely pleasurable the activity is, and not because of the simple movements of putting it away, but there's an underlying stillness with it that goes with that. And so that as you notice that, as you do little things, in other words, 90-something% of your life, if you're aware not only of what you are doing, of course, yes, that's part of present moment awareness, is to give attention to what you're doing, so that the doing is not just a means to an end. The greatest fallacy and big dysfunction in people's lives is that almost all they're doing is a means to an end, that implies future, of course, is a means to an end, and unconsciously the end is regarded as more important than the means. But, of course, the end, which is in the future, is always in the future. The moment it comes, it's the present moment. But the mind pattern that has lodged itself firmly in people's minds is always that the next thing, and it's the thing that I really need to get to. So the moment the so-called future comes and appears as the present moment, something else almost simultaneously or very quickly afterwards, something else appears looming up in the so-called future. Oh, I need to get there. Of course, there are things that you need to achieve and go towards, and that involves time and so on. But if that absorbs almost 100% of your attention, or even if it absorbs 80% of your attention, you're out of balance, because if future absorbs 80% of your attention, you only have 20% of your attention left for the one thing that is ever real in your life, which is the present moment. So the present moment is just, okay. So that's why many people don't actually, very rarely feel really comfortable with the present moment. It's rare for people to regard the present moment even in a friendly way. Many people live continuously in some kind of almost confrontational or denying relationship with the present moment. And then their entire life is then not aligned with the present moment, which is life itself, because the only place where life can appear to you is in the present moment. There is nothing else ever. And so your life is not aligned, your life with a small l is not aligned with life with a capital L. And that out of alignment creates an unhappy existence. And millions of people leading such an unhappy existence create an entire culture or civilization, every aspect of which reflects back to you that basically unhappy state that all those millions are in. So all the things that the culture produces, the civilization produces, the structures, the economic structures, political structures, educational, and so on, they will contain these elements of that state of consciousness that created them. So that's the dysfunctional element in politics, in economics, in educational system, and so on. Which all those things that you can see are not working very well because they are products of a certain collective state of consciousness. And the collective state of consciousness is made up of millions of individuals that produces the collective state of consciousness. So if you try to tackle exclusively the products of that collective consciousness in the form of the economic structures, the political educational system, and so on, then you're working only on one end of the spectrum, and it's not the causal you're working on effect. And what you can do is limit it. Yes, you can initiate changes, but what is the state of consciousness in the individuals and in you as you try to initiate changes? So the causal is the individual, so that the individual no longer lives in a way that produces unhappiness and is dysfunctional. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation.
My North Star is the monk, the story you shared about the monk who lived, saying, "Is that so?" For everything that came. I am trying my best to get there in my journey to accepting the isness of things and accepting the moment. What I'm struggling with is, when am I being a doormat? How do I determine? It's clear in the example you just shared, being homeless. In the gray areas of life, how do I determine when I need to take action?
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Good. I don't know if that story I wrote about it in the New Earth, I think. The monk who is accused of having seduced a young girl who became pregnant because the girl told her parents that this monk did it. And then the parents went to the monk and said, "Oh, the horrible thing you did." Now, she told us what you did. And all the monk ever said was, "Is that so?" And then they told everybody else. He lost his reputation. And that was that happened before the arrival of Twitter and Facebook and so on. But basically he was canceled in modern terminology. And then the girl gave birth to the baby. And the parents said, "We don't want that baby, we'll take it to the monk. He can look after it, it's his baby." So they brought the baby to the monk and, "Here's your baby, you look after the baby." And the monk said, "Is that so?" And then the monk looked after the baby for a year or so, just looked after it very well. And then the girl grew up a little bit more, who had given birth, and then finally she confessed to her parents that he was not the father, but it was some young guy from next door. And so the parents ran back to the monk and said, "We are terribly sorry. We now know that you're not the father of the baby." And again, the monk said, "Is that so?" And he handed the baby back to the parents. That is an extreme example of non-resistance. Jesus has another extreme example of non-resistance. Is somebody slaps you on the one cheek and you offer your other cheek. That's another extreme example of non-resistance. But all it points to is not so much what you do on an outer level, but it points to an inner state of non-resistance. You could still, if you had were that monk, you could still have said, "This is not true. I did not father this baby. This is not." Even then, you could still be in an inner state of non-resistance. They could state simply, "This is how it is." Probably nobody would have believed him, but he could have stated it. And so, the important thing is, non-resistance is not so much to do what externally what you do, but it's an inner state of consciousness of non-resistance, acceptance of what is, of the present moment in this moment. It doesn't. If it's misunderstood, then it could lead, as you say, it could lead you to become a doormat, because then you would go along with what anybody says to you. And you would, "Can you do this? Can you do this for me?" "Yeah, okay, I can do it." And then you could be used by people, but a state of non-resistance sometimes may require you to say no to let's say somebody requests something, but you feel you don't want to do it, or you cannot do it for some reason, and you say no. I think I wrote about this. I had this expression, a high quality no, as opposed to a low quality no. A low quality no is you make the other person into a kind of enemies. And why you always ask me this? Like you argue and you shout, you accuse the other person. You're just trying to use me. I can see it. You've used me before, and now you're doing it again. Now you're asking me for money again. I've already lent you 5 times here. Have you given it back to me? No, you haven't. So no, I'm not going to do it. Just don't, leave me alone. That's one no. And then there's another no, which is non-reactive. It's not does not arise from reactivity, but is a response to the situation that says, no, I don't want to, let's say, whatever the request is or the demand. No, I can't do it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. No, I'm not going to give you money again because I've already given you 5 times. So I won't give you again. That's just how it is. I can't. No, I cannot. Whatever it may be, you're saying no without creating an enemy, without treating, or a situation, without making a situation into an enemy. So it's a conscious no, and you're still in an inner state of non-resistance. The state of resistance strengthens the ego, and this is a way of not operating through ego. So you don't have to become a doormat. But this non-reactive no requires you to be alert and present. And then also part of that is you stop complaining to people about what they do. as I gave in the example I gave just a minute ago, when you give a low quality no, you make the other wrong and you complain about them, all that drops away. I often, as you might know, I often remember an important aspect of the egoic mind, the unconscious patterns of the egoic mind, is the complaining function, complaining about other humans, their deficiencies, what the many ways in which they are wrong and lacking in whatever it may be. And for many humans, it's a very important part of their life is complaining about others. Either you can complain to them directly or very frequently to other people when you're talking. You know what he said, and then you tell the story. And again, another favorite occupation of the ego is telling a story of what he or she did. And then he said this and that. And I said, how dare you do this again? And then he said, and then I said, it's a very frequent thing that unconscious people do. And you're always the winner, of course. You're always the one who is right in that story. The complaining disappears from your life. And that's a very important shift because it has no purpose. I'm not talking about complaining to say, I want to exchange this thing. I bought this yesterday, but it's not working. That's not complaining. You could make it into complaining because you could personalize it and regarding as a personal insult to you that they sold you something that's not working. And then it becomes an unpleasant drama again. But to rectify something that is wrong is not complaining unless you make it into complaining. You seem to say, I want to return this because it's not working. But you don't go in, the soup is cold. Can you please heat it up? You don't, how dare you serve me this cold soup? You bring in the me, the offended person. Oh, offended is a big thing these days, as you know. Everybody's offended continuously on social media and everywhere. I'm offended. Yes, no, I'm more offended than you. The ego has, in certain time periods, the ego manifests in different ways. And now, of course, the ego uses the opportunity of the digital age, social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else it's called, I don't know. It uses that to amplify itself in certain ways that were not possible before. So it's a great opportunity for the ego to proliferate and amplify itself. You realize that even there, one cannot say that you are choosing this. You are an expression of consciousness. And consciousness, one could say, is choosing, and you think you are doing it. I'm surprised there's nothing on Google about Eckhart and free will, but maybe I haven't said anything about it. So here we go. As you know, it's an eternal, ancient philosophical question, and there's never been a definitive answer that everybody would agree with in that sense. So is there free will? You mentioned everybody's doing their best because nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness, etc., for example. Okay, let's start from on one level, and then we go on to the next level. On the level of egoic unconsciousness, where you are a conditioned entity, your mental, emotional makeup is totally conditioned by the past, and you are completely identified with the conditioning of your mind, and in that state, that spiritually speaking is the unconscious state, it is obvious that in that state there is no freedom at all, because you are forced to act out the unconscious conditioning of your mind with which you are completely identified. So I think most people would probably agree, if you understand that on that level there is no possibility of freedom. Your actions are determined by your conditioned mind. You are forced to act as you do because there is no choice, because choice would imply some awareness. So on that level, there's certainly no freedom. Then awareness comes in. The human being begins to awaken. Then it appears, I'm not saying it is the case, it appears that then freedom begins to be a possibility, because you can choose to step out of the conditioning of your mind. You can recognize a conditioned thought, and you are no longer compelled to act it out because there is an awareness there. You can choose a certain course of action, not from the conditioning of your mind, but from the presence. So you can act, and you have much more freedom that before you could not have. Freedom comes with awareness. So it's then relative to the unconscious state, there is now freedom to act. But if you look more deeply, even there on that level, you are connected with the totality of consciousness. You're only an expression of the totality of consciousness. You are not really a separate entity. You are as who said it? You are, was it Alan Watts who said you in the same way that the wave is something that the ocean is doing, you are something that the whole universe is doing in the same way. So the wave is something the ocean is doing, you are something that the universe is doing. So although it appears from a certain relative to the previous state of unconscious, there is freedom, and relative to that there is freedom. But then if you look more deeply into that, you realize that even there, one cannot say that you are choosing this. You are an expression of consciousness, and consciousness, one could say, is choosing, and you think you are doing it. Sometimes people ask me, can you choose to be present? From one perspective, you can choose to be present. From another perspective, one could say that the presence chooses you. It chooses to become present through you. Depends how you look at it. So in ultimate terms, or in relative terms, there is freedom relative to the unconscious state when you become more conscious. But even there, it's only relative to the unconscious state. Even there is not absolute freedom, because you do not exist as an independent entity. You are part of the web of interconnectedness that is the whole universe. So in that sense, there is no freedom of choice of the individual, because ultimately there is no individual.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Just want to add one more thing to that, because you mentioned everybody's doing their best and so on, and I agreed that nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness. A question that may arise, though, is responsibility and punishment. Because if the criminal or whoever the perpetrator is not responsible because they are totally in the grip of their conditioning, does that mean then that the perpetrator is not responsible for what they do? And it does seem to be the case, a very unconscious person, in that sense, is not responsible for what they do. Now, does that mean we must not punish this person because he couldn't help it? Now, that's a difficult point. There is a destiny for human beings. Human beings are meant to move out of the unconscious state, and if they are not moving out of the unconscious state, they create suffering, and they will have to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness, which eventually awakens them. So when humans suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness, eventually that leads to suffering, and then there is a possibility of awakening. So although they may not be conscious for what they do, it don't mean that karmic retribution on that level does not operate. Punishment is necessary, and sometimes it could be at the hands of the law or the judicial system. First of all, other humans need to be protected from them, so they need to be put away. And although they may not be responsible, but they will have to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. And by suffering the consequences of their unconsciousness, there is a possibility of awakening. And so therefore I've had contact with quite a few people who are imprisoned, and they have written to me, and they have experienced an awakening in prison. They suffered the consequences of their unconsciousness, and that led to an awakening. I was actually scheduled to talk in a couple of prisons in California, but I fell ill in the earlier this year, so I had to be cancelled. But hopefully soon I will be able to talk to prisoners. Both I had scheduled both to a women's prison and a man's prison. Free of compulsive thinking. And then you are free to use thinking as a beautiful tool for creating, but you're no longer creating from an egoic neediness. You're creating as an expression of consciousness that creates through you. Whatever it is that you create depends on who you are on the form level as a person. You may have certain abilities or certain things you have learned, and how or what you create depends on that. But that which inspires the creation is the consciousness that then moves through you into a particular channel. And then creativity comes in. Whether you're an artist or even a scientist needs that, or the science is based on rational thinking and analysis. The greatest breakthrough in science came to people, and there are many stories about that. They came to people who suddenly went blank, not really blank, but spacious. Einstein had many moments of spaciousness. And then things suddenly come that could not be arrived at through thinking. Thinking was necessary too, but it didn't. The real breakthrough comes as a revelation, even in science. So, and it transforms your relationships to other humans. And that's a beautiful thing. Even if that's all, if you're not creative in any other area except in all your relationships, to relate with that feeling of benevolence towards others, no matter whether it's your intimate relationships or relationships that happen for a few minutes during the day, all these are important. And so when you're no longer judging a human being, then you can sense a flow of goodwill towards a human. But it presupposes that you are not judging yourself either. So first you have come into your own spaciousness, and then you discover the spaciousness in the other, even if they don't know it yet. When your gaze, in a wider sense, gaze not just the visual gaze, but directing your attention to somebody and going deeper than the surface appearance of that person, which is first of all the physical form of that person. Now, for many people, that's the first thing they notice and the last thing they notice. They only relate to another as a physical form, which they either are not interested in or they want it. I want you. And then beyond the physical form, there's the psychological form of that person, the kind of personality that this person has. So that's the next thing. So level 1 is the physical thing when you meet somebody. Level 2 is the personality of that person, which is also it's a psychological. This is the physical form. The next level down is the psychological form. And if you're stuck on those two levels, you can never truly come to a relationship of true lovingness towards the other, of true goodwill towards the other, of truly sensing something that unites you to the other. There's always that sense of separation because you haven't gone deep enough into the other. Why haven't you gone deep enough into the other? Because you haven't gone deep enough into yourself. It's only if you've gone deep enough into yourself, and by deep enough means into the inner spaciousness in which you're not thinking, no compulsive thinking, an alertness remains. That is, you become suddenly very deep. And then you can look at another human being, no matter what they say or do or how they look, you can then sense their beingness also, but only through yours. And there you meet. When you can sense a human's beingness, even if they can't sense it for themselves, there's a feeling of love, not in a conventional sense, a lovingness towards the other. And you recognize the most essential thing of who you are is also in the other. You recognize that oneness. And what is that? It's consciousness. What you love in true love, what you love in the other, is their consciousness. What you love in the dog, although it's lovely to touch a dog, it's lovely to look at the dog or the cat, but what you really love when you look into the eyes of the dog is the consciousness of the dog. The beingness looks back at you, and you look into the eyes, and unobstructed by thinking in the dog. And for a moment, the dog frees you from your own thinking. People don't know that that's what happens. And that's why they love dogs, because for a moment, you look at a dog and there are always a few moments when you're not, unless you're so burdened that you can't even be present with your dog. For a moment, the dog frees you off and you go, you feel yourself more fully, because there's a being who is one with itself. and it's not imposing anything. So there's the shared beingness or consciousness you suddenly sense. And this shared consciousness, to realize the shared consciousness, is love in the true sense. And the same could happen even with a tree, when you truly acknowledge the beingness of the tree from your inner, so that you look at it without imposing judgment or interpretation on it. It does not mean that you can never say anything about the tree. It means, for example, it means there are two ways of knowing the tree or anything, or knowing a human being, of knowing anything. There are two ways of knowing, even yourself. One is through thinking and concepts. So I can know you by knowing many things about you and your past and what happened to you and your background. And so all these things I know about you. But there is a more fundamental and more essential way of knowing. I can know you as consciousness rather than as the form that you are. I can know the tree by looking at it, giving it my fullest attention, and just be awareness, the awareness for the sense perception. And I'm looking at that tree and I can suddenly sense its aliveness, its stillness, its beingness. I can sense that. Sensing that means I'm connecting with it, and connecting means the connection has always been there, but now you notice it, you connect it, connect with the tree, and you love it. It does not mean that in some other moment, when a child wants to know what the name of this tree is, because there is a time when a child asks about names and concepts, you're not going to refuse and say, I'm not going to tell you what the name, because I don't want you to get trapped in concepts. You have to encourage the child not to lose the deeper knowing when you give the name. So you tell this is an oak tree, or better, you tell the child, we call it an oak tree, because it isn't an oak tree, we call it an oak tree. And then encourage the child to look, to continuously continue to perceive it, touch it. If there's something to smell, smell it, listen to the leaves, listen, look, touch, interact, give it your attention, so that the child is not trapped in a world of concepts, as is the destiny of many children these days at an early age, get completely absorbed by concepts. And before you know it, at a fairly early age, they are lost in their minds. Unhappy a lot of the time. What's the next thing that I can think of that I need? We'll talk about that. So if you discover within yourself that a lot of the time you're in a state of lack, of insufficiency, of not enough, and you feel that the answer to, the remedy is to be active in this world and achieve and do as much as possible, then you'll probably find that ultimately that is not the answer to your state of lack. In order to transcend, to go beyond your state of lack, of neediness, of not enough, spiritual practice and spiritual realization is necessary. Focus on the realization of being. It's only there that you can go beyond that state of lack, which is ego. Go within and discover who or what you are beyond the person. But you can actually perceive more deeply without immediately attaching a mental label to your perceptions. And this is, I've quoted before, the beautiful line from Krishnamurti, who said, if you teach a child, the moment you teach a child the name of that bird, he will never see that bird again. And there's a deep truth in that, because what happens then in the mind, the concept obscures the reality. And so many humans are so full of conceptual thinking that they can no longer experience life, or they only experience life through the dense veil of their conceptual mind, which is a dreadful limitation and a dreadful burden. And then your life looks like, and you already, whatever appears in your consciousness, you already immediately interpret it according to your conditioning. You have an immediate opinion, and the opinion is the truth, cannot be questioned. That's how it is. And you have a judgment for everybody you meet. In other words, a mental label. You never meet another human being. You only meet your concept of the other human being. And you think that's who they are. It's not. So that's why, that's the matrix. You're asleep. You're a slave to your mind. So here you discover your ability, if you want to call it that. You don't need to label everything and figure out. You perceive from a deeper level. Start with nature. Nature is easier than humans. Nature doesn't think, so it doesn't stimulate the mind. The tree doesn't think. There is a conscious presence there, which assumes the tree form, but the tree has no conceptual thinking. At least I've never heard a tree think. When you stand by a tree and you look at the tree, you can actually sense how still it is and how deeply rooted in being the tree is. And some trees have been there for hundreds of years. If there were a sound associated with a tree, it would probably sound like And also if you look into the eyes of a dog that comes at you with its tail wagging, and you'll notice there's a moment when you can be free of thinking, because the dog isn't thinking. The dog has no conceptual opinion of who you are, and so there's no judgment. And so it frees you for a moment from your mind. That's why people feel drawn and they go, they don't realize that for 3 seconds, or 4, 5, they're not thinking. They're just perceiving the dog, and you're looking into the dog's eyes and can sense the being of the dog, and that awakens their own being for a few seconds. But if you start to live with a dog, it doesn't work, or it may still work, but I have seen many dog owners, let's say they come back to the dog is, you go into a store to buy something, the dog is in the car, When you get back to the car after 5 minutes, the dog greets you as if you had been away for a year. And some owners don't even acknowledge the greeting of the dog. But if they were a little bit more present, they could just go, I'm back. But they just go, they're too immersed in their mind to notice the joy of the dog. But don't depend on dogs. So practice, because you know now you had practice in all kinds of situations, the wonderful skill, which really is a new state of consciousness, of not naming. And even while you're doing things, not naming what you're doing. Just do it and be the underlying presence for the doing. This could be anything. Washing your hands. Now, most people, while they wash their hands, they would not be naming that actual activity. They would not be saying, now I'm washing my hands. Some people actually mistake the presence practice for that, and they think when they're saying, now I'm washing my hands, they're being present. But that's not quite it. No, most people, when they wash their hands, they're totally somewhere else in their mind. So occasionally, from time to time, use little activities and do not name what you're doing, but give it your attention without interpretation. And then you will sense either the warmth or the coolness of the water on your hands. You will sense the soap, you will smell the soap. And it is a pleasant experience. If you don't name it, it actually can be a very still thing, an interval of stillness. Making a cup of tea. There was a clip, but we didn't get it from the Oprah. There's so many lovely Oprah shorts. We saw some last night. There's one where I think Oprah makes a cup of tea, and it has some elements of presence in it there. There's a moment the camera shows you the kettle is beginning to boil. And there's the teapot. Tea. Put in the tea or tea bag, and then you take the kettle. Making tea and being present while making tea, as in Japan, under the influence of Zen, has developed into a kind of ritual, the tea-making ritual. The real reason for it is to use it as a vehicle for presence. Sometimes people just master the externals of it, but it's very different when this is practiced by somebody who is truly present and somebody who has only mastered the externals of that and is actually still thinking while they're doing it. Little things, so there's these passive sense perceptions. When you're driving, yes, there's a red light, you stop and you look at the red light and you look at everything that's around you and take it in, and you are the alert presence. And then the lights change, you go on. You could do it every time there's a red light. Great opportunity, because what else are you going to do? Useless thinking? What can you think about at the red light? How dreadful it is that you have to stop? That you'd rather be somewhere else? Maybe that's a bumper sticker, could be, I'd rather be somewhere else. Well, that would be an interesting bumper sticker. And for most people, that's a mind pattern, a deep mind pattern. Amazing. Imagine, without knowing it, going through most of your life, 95%, 98%, with that mindset that basically tells you, I'd rather be somewhere else or doing something else. But unfortunately, I'm here and I have to do this. Maybe one day I'll be somewhere else and I won't have to do this. And I'll be with other people but not with these people. And living in another place but not this place. And drive another car, not this one. So your deeper identity is there, emerges more every time you practice, not naming when naming isn't required. The hardest knowledge, obviously, is self-knowledge. That's why the ancient Greeks, like Plato, Socrates, the main one, said his main dictum is know thyself. Know thyself. That's the most important thing in life, Socrates said. By the way, he lived about the same time as the Buddha. He said, the most important thing is know thyself. And that was inscribed at the Temple of Delphi in ancient Greece. Know thyself. Another strange inscription, and that takes us now to where we are going. On the same temple inscribed was saying that for a long time people couldn't interpret. They thought something was missing. The other words on the temple was, so on the other side of the temple, you are in Greek. You are. And so the archaeologists looked into, there's something missing here. You are, and they tried, is there another word that you are? But there was no other word. You are. Know thyself. You are. Oh. Then at some point somebody understood what it probably meant. It was pointing to a deeper dimension of who you are. But the real knowing yourself is not just knowing the personality. That's only one level. It's not the deepest level of knowing yourself. It's important too to know all the stuff that runs you, that operates in you as a conditioning of your mind. This kind of thing people go to a psychoanalyst for. They want to know thyself. What the psychoanalyst or psychiatrist, psychoanalyst can do for you is he can show you all kinds of things from your past. And if you go to a psychoanalyst, you can go for many years. Some people go for 20 years, 20, 30 years to a once or twice a week. Okay, and the story goes on, and discover more and more intricate things about your childhood. And then what happened? And how did you feel about that? And then what did your mother say? And then up to a point it's helpful, but then it goes on. And you get trapped in that level. And it becomes more and more complex. One level of knowing yourself is knowing how your ego operates, being able to witness it. For example, as I mentioned, in an argument, you become emotional and you witness it. Oh, so another faculty is there behind the conditioned mind that can observe what you're doing and say, oh, you're becoming very angry about nothing. So maybe you're shouting, but in the back there's something that has arisen. It's an awareness. It says you're shouting about nothing. You're witnessing what the ego is doing. This means that the beginning of the end of the ego. The witnessing faculty is the awareness. You are. So if you translate it into you, you'd have to say, I am. Okay. I am. And what am I? So let's investigate now this level of deeper identity. I call it the deep I as opposed to the surface I. The deep I, to find that which is underneath the person. And in order to find that, the stream of thinking that sustains that personal sense of self needs momentarily come to a cessation. And that's why I started this evening with observing your breath, because that can bring about a brief sensation in the stream of thinking. And in that moment, awareness remains, consciousness remains, but it doesn't become thought. And this is a very strange thing to realize from the egoic point of view. So what, says the ego? It doesn't realize that is of extraordinary importance to find that, to discover that dimension that is deeper than the egoic self, that is a dimension of consciousness before it becomes thought. So the most vital realization for you is to realize that there are spaces in your mind that you just need to discover, or really ultimately only one space. You discover that there is a space in you where you can be conscious without needing to think, but you're very alert. You're completely here. Another word for it, some words can be helpful as pointers. Another word for it is stillness. You discover a dimension of stillness within you. Stillness means consciousness without the movement of thought. Wow. And you can still perceive everything. In fact, you perceive it more acutely, more deeply, when you are not labeling mentally thought, when you are not labeling mentally what you're perceiving. You can look around, flower, room, sky. Everything is there. You know what you're looking at without calling it anything, without concept. And you haven't gone to sleep, because normally humans becoming free of thinking, the only way they can do that when they haven't awakened, they have to go to sleep, or they have to take some kind of drug that slows down your mind. There may be a place for drugs in certain cases, sacred surroundings. Don't need to go there, it takes too long. But the discovery that stillness, which is unconditioned consciousness, which is deeper than the person, is always there, but it's covered up by the noise of the mind. And you are completely identified with this surface movement. So you can't find the deeper self, where there is enormous peace and a deep sense of aliveness that gives you everything that you had been looking for as a surface egoic entity in this realm of this physical realm or this even psychological realm. You were looking for that, never finding this ultimate sense of being home, having arrived, you feeling at home in the universe, rather than being alienated. Alienation is a very common mental illness for millions of humans, especially modern day humans. So the most important discovery for you is discover there's something deeper in you than you, the person. They are not separate in the same way that the ripple on the surface of the ocean is not separate from the ocean. The ripple is a surface phenomenon. It's something that the ocean does. And you are something that consciousness, universal, the one universal consciousness that pervades the entire universe, that is transcendent to this universe, it is something that consciousness does. It creates the image of a person, like the ocean produces a ripple or a wave on the surface. And there goes a little ripple, and it has a name. Whatever name you have for you as the ripple, that's me. And the ripple is uneasy because it's surrounded by many, many other ripples, and you never know what they want. Some ripples may be dangerous, they don't want, you may defend yourself, and others you think, if I incorporate this ripple into myself, I become a bigger ripple. I need you. In other words, you fall in love. I'm not talking about real love. I'm talking about falling in love, which is, come, I need you. Don't you dare leave me, though. So the ripple leads a very uneasy existence because it doesn't know that it is part of the ocean. You know by now that I'm talking about you as the human. Every human is a ripple on the surface of being, the vastness of being, of consciousness. And so to look for yourself in this movie show that continuously changes the impermanence of all things is a form of suffering. So wanting to hang on to this, identify with this. And the movie show includes, it's not just all the things that happen externally around you. The movie show is also the thoughts that pass through your mind. That's also part of the movie. And they come and go. And what people get entangled with, even more than the so-called external world, ultimately it's all the inner world, and put that aside. What you get entangled with is the much more so than every thought that comes, you get entangled in that. And look for your sense of self in that. You identify with the thoughts that come, your opinions, viewpoints, likes, dislikes, all. You believe every thought that comes that tells you what your life is all about. My life, I have to think about my life. it hasn't worked out. Not the way I wanted it to work out. Why did all this have to happen? And then I failed at this, I failed at that. Maybe I can still make it, maybe not. I need to think harder about me and my life. There must be a solution to the problem of me. Maybe if I see several psychotherapists, psychiatrists, maybe eventually they can help me find a solution to the problem of me, because I perceive myself as a problem, like a knot, K-N-O-T, like a knot that wants to be entangled, but it can't. Well, how do I do that? And then the psychotherapist, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, the counselor may help you untie this knot of the unhappy me, but it takes a long time, and never really managed to do it until you realize that the entire knot is a kind of illusory construct, and on that level you can't do much about it. But if you realize it consists of thought plus emotion that you had identified with, then suddenly it's not a problem anymore, and suddenly you become aware of who you are beyond that. And then you let it be, as the song goes, and suddenly you are not a problem to yourself anymore, because you're not looking for your sense of identity anymore on the level of thought or emotion. And then thought becomes less problematic. Thought loses its capacity to make you unhappy. Because before, you might have noticed, most of the time when you get unhappy, it's because of certain thoughts that arise in your head that you completely believe in. Interpretations of situations, events, people, misinterpretations, very one-sided interpretation, as every interpretation is. It's just a viewpoint. And those things create unhappiness. Most of the time, that's what makes you miserable. If you become miserable, anxious, regretful, it's believing the thoughts that arise continuously, which are part of the movie show. So it's not just the movie show out here, it's also the movie show in your head. And so if you get dragged along in it, then it's a very confusing way to live. Yeah. You have no central sense of identity. And this is why so many people manifest in different situations. They manifest different aspects of their conditioned mind, which are sometimes called subpersonalities or whatever. And you might have noticed those people in whom there is little or no awareness, they can change from one moment to the next, from one day to the next, and you have a different person, or one situation to the next. When they encounter certain situations, suddenly some other subpersonality comes up. This is still considered, this is not schizophrenia or anything like that. That's still considered within the realm of what is normal. So I was always amazed for the short periods in my life when I lived communally, how changeable people are. And I always remember every morning I would sit at breakfast in a community where I lived in England for a little while. And I always wondering who is going to come down the stairs from the bedroom, what aspect of their personalities. One day it's a wonderful day, isn't it? It's so great to be alive. And then the next day, leave me alone. It's just a dreadful place. I'm trying to get out of here. I don't know how can people live in this place. It's so dreadful. And this is only And other subpersonalities in humans are triggered by specific situations, sometimes involving money, or somebody dies, and then who is going to get the heritage, the funds, and then suddenly everybody becomes totally. Or certain people can do it because one person may remind you of somebody that you once knew who wasn't pleasant. All these things that you get entangled in with your sense of self, and that does not happen anymore, or if it does still happen occasionally to you, you'll fairly quickly wake up again and realize who you actually and essentially are. And that is, you are not your thoughts or not your emotions and not whatever arises and happens around you. You are the still center, so to speak. So it's a way of experiencing the world that frees you from the world internally without leading to a sense of separation. When I say it frees you from the world, it sounds almost as if you felt a sense of separation now between yourself and the movie show. There is a detachment, yes, but also as you interact with everybody, there is more of a feeling of non-separation that we interact with, because it's not your sense of self anymore that you're seeking to reinforce by interacting with other humans. So you can allow them to be as they are. And the judgmental mind either subsides completely, or you no longer believe in every judgment that comes into your head, every thought that arises. So that's a wonderful way that removes fear from your life. Because if you're entangled in the movie show of your life, it's fearful, because you cannot really hang on to anything for too long, and it cannot give you your sense of who you are. And it's fearful because you're ultimately the inability to trust life, which traditionally for example, in Christian terminology is called faith. Faith is the ability to have a basic trust in life. It's not faith in something. In some languages, faith and belief are the same word. But faith basically is belief is you believe that a certain story that you've been told is absolutely true, and it once happened and is absolutely true. Okay? And if somebody else doesn't believe it, then he's going to hell. Yeah. He's going to hell because he doesn't believe the story. Okay? You don't believe my story? I'm going to kill you. That sounds funny, but it's still many people's reality. That's still many people's state of consciousness. But faith is something deeper. It's nothing to do with any story. Faith is a basic trust in life that can only come from this inner connectedness with that place of stillness within. That the absence of fear is trust. The inability to have this basic rootedness in being, if you don't have that, you will have fear, one form or another, you may not always be conscious of it, but it'll always be somewhere in the background and sometimes very much in the foreground.